A prominent law firm has made a deal with the Trump administration after being targeted by name with an executive order. The president took aim at the Paul Weiss firm last week, signing an order that would have suspended active security clearances of its attorneys and cancel any federal contracts. All because a former partner of the firm worked on a criminal case against President Trump while he was at the Manhattan DA's office. But in a quick reversal, the order has been rescinded after the head of the firm visited the White House this week and made concessions to the president. It highlights the length Trump is willing to go to punish those who cross him and the extent private individuals will go to acquiesce to Trump's demands. Joining me now is the Hill's courts and legal reporter, Zach Schonfeld. Zach, Brad Karp, who heads the Paul Weiss firm, met face-to-face with Trump at the White House. What do we know about the deal reached to see that executive order dropped?
Hey, Drew, this deal includes a few components. So one of the big ones is that there is now a $40 million commitment from Paul Weiss to spend on the equivalent of pro bono legal services for causes aligned with this Trump administration. So some of the examples that were given in the announcement were work on veterans issues and also work combating anti-Semitism. We've heard a lot of criticism from the president's allies, and this is nothing new, that so much of the pro bono legal work done by big law firms goes to liberal causes. You see that playing out right now in so many of these lawsuits currently going through the courts against the Trump administration. Now, beyond that pro bono commitment, there are also a few other components. They have committed to merit-based hiring and some of the rhetoric around Trump's anti-DEI push. And then also there's some statements regarding what is called bedrock principles of American justice. But it's that pro bono $40 million commitment that certainly jumps out in this deal.
Well, the White House has said that Karp acknowledged, quote, wrongdoing by one of the firm's partners. What was it specifically the firm was targeted over?
Yeah, that comment of wrongdoing references a former Paul Weiss partner named Mark Pomerantz. Pomerantz left the firm to go work for the Manhattan District Attorney's Office in its criminal investigation of Donald Trump. That investigation ultimately led to the hush money case that went to trial last year and resulted in the first and only ever criminal conviction of a former president. Unclear exactly what Trump means by wrongdoing, but Pomerantz had played a very prominent role in that investigation before charges were ever brought. He had actually been helping to build a criminal case on something completely unrelated to that Stormy Daniels hush money payment. Instead, Pomerantz was trying to build a case on Trump over unrelated financial crimes. Pomerantz resigned from the DA's office after Alvin Bragg was elected district attorney and refused to bring an indictment against Trump on those grounds. Now, of course, we know the DA months later returned to the table on the hush money prong to bring that indictment of Trump. But Pomerantz has continued to loom large in Trump's mind as he views everyone who worked in that office as politically biased against him. And now you're seeing that play out in some of these executive orders and this retribution campaign.
And Zach, this deal seems like another instance of companies willing to strike a deal with the president after finding themselves in his crosshairs. We've seen Meta and ABC settle suits brought on by the president. Now, with executive orders being used to target what might be perceived as Trump's enemies, what type of a threat do you think this poses to the legal system?
It certainly has made a lot of difficult decisions for executives at these companies and firms that have been targeted. And you see the differences in approach playing out just in these now three big law firms that have been targeted by the president. We've been talking a lot about what Paul Weiss did. They went to the White House and sought a deal. There's a second firm that's actually suing the president in court, trying to get a judge to block his executive order. And then the third firm that's been targeted, Covington, they also haven't filed a lawsuit or struck any sort of deal. So a bit more unclear what they're doing. But I did notice that this week they actually are the lawyers on a new lawsuit challenging the Trump administration. So at least on that lawsuit, they decided not to back down.
All right, we'll leave it at that. Zach Schonfeld, thanks so much.
Thanks, Drew.
As President Trump and his administration ramp up attacks on U.S. District Judge James Boasberg, Representative Brandon Gill, a Republican from Texas, has filed articles of impeachment. Gill and 16 co-sponsors are targeting Boasberg over his moves to block the deportation of Venezuelan migrants to El Salvador and Boasberg's inquiry into whether the Trump administration ignored his orders. Joining me to discuss this and more, Mychael Schnell, congressional reporter here at The Hill. Michael, Trump was asked about Judge Boasberg today at the White House. Let's take a listen.
They're tough people. They're bad people. We don't want them in our country. We can't let a judge say that he wants him. You know, he didn't run for president. He didn't get much more than 80 million votes. And we just can't let that happen. It'd be so bad for our country.
So does Speaker Mike Johnson want to spend valuable floor time on this issue, debating whether or not a district judge should be impeached?
That's the key question here, right? Johnson, I had a piece published this morning. Johnson's in this tricky position where the path forward is very murky. On one hand, he has this immense pressure from President Trump, from Elon Musk, and a number of Republican lawmakers up on Capitol Hill who are pushing for the House to impeach Boasberg. As you mentioned, Brandon Gill introduced an article of impeachment. It charges Boasberg with abuse of power, and there are a lot of Republicans lobbying for this to come up for a vote. On the other side of the coin, though, you have a number of moderate Republicans who have voiced concerns about impeaching Boasberg, say they're not in support of it, and it could be a politically difficult vote for a number of those moderates as they look for re-election next year. I spoke to two Republicans yesterday, Don Bacon, Republican from Nebraska, and Dusty Johnson, a Republican from South Dakota. They both told me that they are not in favor of this push, and then I heard from a House GOP source who said there are dozens who feel the same way behind the scenes. So Mike Johnson is going to have to weigh this issue when Congress returns to session next week. Does he appease President Trump and Musk and a number of his hardline conservative members, or does he protect folks who don't want to take this vote and maybe protect Trump even from an embarrassing vote because it would likely fail?
I wonder if for people like Representative Gill, just bringing it up, kind of dragging the judge through the mud with these threats is accomplishing their goal of maybe intimidating judges that might seek to block the Trump administration.
Perhaps, very well could be. We've also seen articles of impeachment against some other district judges who have made decisions and published opinions that have been against the Trump administration's moves. I will note, though, one question, open question, lingering question, that's going to be key to this situation is whether or not Brandon Gill or any of these other Republicans force a vote on the articles of impeachment. If he makes his resolution privileged, he can go to the House floor, force a vote on it, and compel leadership to act on the legislation within 2 legislative days. Now, Johnson would likely either hold a vote to refer it to committee, the Judiciary Committee, which oversees impeachment, or he can hold a vote to table it. The third option, of course, putting the article on the floor for a vote of the full House, which is unlikely to happen. But you mentioned in the beginning, Drew, this would, A, waste precious floor time on an effort that is never going to go anywhere, because even if the impeachment does squeak through in the House, which is a big if because of that skepticism, it's not going anywhere in the Senate. In order to remove an impeached judge, you need a supermajority, 67 votes. Even if all Republicans are on board in the Senate, and there are some who have cast out, you need at least 14 Democrats to support it as well. That is never going to happen. So maybe Gill has accomplished his goal by just introducing this article. Maybe he'll try to go a step further by forcing a vote on it. But again, this all leads to Speaker Johnson's prickly position he's in about how to handle, A, whether or not to bring up this resolution for a vote, and B, what to do if somebody forces a vote on it.
Yeah, and I wonder if Democrats would welcome this. Like, go ahead, waste your time, and divide your conference.
I mean, perhaps that's a possibility. Look, we have seen House Democrats really hammer away at this effort, saying that this is not what you do. You don't impeach a judge just because you don't agree with their decision. That's what the appeals process is for. But you bring up a good point. The narrative for the better part of the past 2 weeks has been this Democratic infighting, right? It happened with the government funding bill. We've seen a lot of folks be going after Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries going after one another. That's been the narrative, that this rebuilding period for Democrats does not seem to have been making any progress. A potential way to distract from that, and in Washington, oftentimes, folks have a difficult time paying attention to more than one story. The distraction could be letting Republicans fight with one another about impeachment. That's, of course, one of the downfalls and the pitfalls that could come if Johnson pursues this, or if a House Republican forces a vote on it. So again, that's another really important thing to think about here. Do Republicans really want to shift the narrative right now from the negative coverage of Democrats?
And some Republicans are looking for other options to punish judges they see as overstepping their bounds. There's been this talk of cutting funding for district courts, or even limiting the ability for judges to impose nationwide injunctions. Wouldn't that also face similar roadblocks in the House and definitely in the Senate?
Likely, yes. There's the bill that you mentioned about the injunctions, the second one. Jim Jordan, who's the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, he actually referenced that legislation this week, saying that this could be a potential potential avenue if impeachment is not going to work. The Judiciary Committee did advance that legislation last month, so it could come to the floor for a vote. But you're right. I'm sure there would still be some apprehension to that. And let's not forget, Drew, House Republicans are still grappling with this ultra-thin majority, right? So even if there are 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 Republicans who are against something, if all Democrats are also in opposition, that could be enough to sink the priority. So Johnson has to also weigh, what am I bringing to the floor? What would be a good alternative? But would that alternative even have enough support? Because in the House, you need near unanimity. Now, I will note we've seen President Trump, this 11th hour intervention he's done in a number of major legislative undertakings, cajoling a number of skeptical Republicans who were at one point opposed. Minutes after a phone call with Trump, they're in support. He's had a pretty good track record of doing that in his beginning months in office, but something like this could derail that.
Let's quickly get out of Washington. I want to ask you about this Wisconsin Supreme Court race. Early voting has begun. Both Republicans and Democrats have been pouring resources into this race. Why do you think it's become such a focus, and is it a bellwether or a referendum on the initial part of the Trump administration?
Yeah, so two things. The first one thing I was going to mention the bellwether. We always talk, in Washington we crave to understand what the electorate is saying, what the electorate is thinking, and we try to use these off-year races as a way to read how the American people feel. Will this be a bellwether? I'm not sure, but look, we've had about almost 3 full months of the Trump administration, a number of controversial acts coming from the White House, things that Democrats have been up in arms about, some Republicans have criticized, most Republicans have cheered on. I think a lot of folks are wondering, aside from those town halls that we've seen across the country, how are voters feeling? How are they going to vote in response to this? So on one hand, you're right, it could be a bellwether. I'm not sure if it will be. We'll have to see those results. But on the other hand, it's really interesting. It's going to be a referendum, I think, maybe on Elon Musk's power and influence. Musk has really gone all in supporting the Republican candidate in this Wisconsin Supreme Court race. I think a lot of folks are wondering to see how much influence and pull he has among the American electorate. This won't be the surefire answer, but it could surely give us some clues about how folks feel about Elon Musk.
And one of the major focuses of the Democratic attack ads in that race, Elon Musk. So it'll be an interesting test run to see how effective that is for Democrats. We'll leave it at that. Mychael Schnell, thanks so much.
Thanks, Drew.
The United Kingdom has become the latest country to issue a travel warning for the United States. The updated advice is warning travelers of harsh consequences for British passport holders who violate U.S. immigration laws. The instructions warn citizens to comply with all entry and visa requirements or risk being arrested or detained. The warning comes on the heels of Germany issuing similar advice earlier this week after 3 of its citizens were detained at the San Diego-Tijuana border. Earlier in March, a British national was detained in the U.S., according to the UK Foreign Office. A Canadian woman was also recently detained by ICE. The detainments are stirring concern among American allies as the Trump administration continues its immigration crackdown. That's today's Daily Debrief. I'm Drew Petrimoulx. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hill's YouTube channel, and come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.